Good evening. Welcome to tonight's program from the Newark Public Library. Tonight, we are partnering with RiseUpNewark.com to host the launch of their next chapter. Chapter 4 focuses on the times of Kenneth A. Gibson, Newark's first African-American mayor. Gibson served as mayor in the 1970s and 1980s. Rise Up Newark is a multimedia, interactive website. It is designed as a teaching tool for all people, but primarily for young people in grade school through college and beyond, to research and preserve the record of those people who were foot soldiers in the civil rights and other movements in Newark. Rise Up Newark is part of a broader project that will eventually include other northern cities. It already includes Detroit, I believe. Tonight, the site's founder, Newark City historian Junius Williams, will be talking with 3 of the researchers who compiled the material that went into Chapter 4. They will be sharing some of the video from the site, talking about why certain items were chosen, and taking questions from the audience. If anyone has a question or comment, please type it in the chat box or the Q&A box. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Jocelyn Dixon, the director of the Newark Public Library. Jocelyn has been at NPL for a little over 3 months. She came to us from the Prince William Public Library in Virginia and has worked at libraries in Illinois, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. She came to Newark at a challenging time, but has made a strong impression. Jocelyn?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm so glad you all are here, and we look forward to welcoming you back next Monday. I know this COVID has been a challenge. It continues to be a challenge, so please stay safe. Keep your masks on, wash your hands, and all that stuff, as our mayor would say as well. So let me begin my introduction for tonight. As Tom said, since 2017, the Newark Public Library has been in partnership with the Center for Education and Juvenile Justice Incorporated to help populate a website to define the history of the African-American journey for empowerment in the city of Newark, New Jersey. RiseUpNewark.com has attracted more than 1 million users and serves as the underlying source of information for the Newark curriculum, used in social studies classes as a resource in 6 high schools. Much of the documentation for Rise Up Newark comes from the archives of the Newark Public Library and was amassed with the help of the staff of the library, which I say thank you and my hat's off to them. We have a crackerjack staff. Initially, Rise Up Newark was composed of 3 chapters, taking us from the founding of Newark in 1666 to 1970, the year of the election of the first Black mayor, Kenneth Gibson. Today, we are proud to present the people responsible for the development of Chapter 4, a description and assessment of the Ken Gibson administration, continuing the partnership between the library and CEJJ. I will now turn the program over to Junius, the producer of Rise of Newark, who is also the Newark historian and a community fellow here and one of our treasurers here at the library. I look forward to seeing you back again, as I said, on Monday. And thank you all so much for agreeing to do this program with us. And I will now turn it over to Junius. And thank you all again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Jocelyn. I know that you have been here just for 90 days, but you've already left your mark on the Newark Public Library, which is good. I also want to start off by thanking Tom Eichner, who you guys first heard, but Tom has been with us for quite some time. As a matter of fact, from the beginning, with working with the website called Rise Up Newark. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about it, and then I'm going to introduce some people who are going to carry us forward. RiseUpNewark.com was an idea that I got from listening to my friends at SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, of which I was a brief part. Well, I can't say a brief part because SNCC has kind of like been in my life for a while. But I was on the front line with SNCC down in Alabama for a few weeks. And then I worked with Phil Hutchings up here in Newark with SNCC. Now, the most important thing about SNCC to me is ideas. I learned a lot. When I went down to Alabama and eventually went to jail, went to prisons, Kilby State Prison for the right to vote. Met all kinds of people. My guru was worth long, still is. I learned more from SNCC in that 2 to 3 week period than I did in the whole semester at college, probably, maybe even more than that. But the point I want to make is I'm still learning, because I heard from the SNCC veterans that they were going to set up a website tracing the history of the civil rights movement from the SNCC perspective. And that is, in fact, what they did. It's a part of Duke University. They have been able to raise money. And from them, you meet the foot soldiers, the people on the ground who made a lot of leaders look good. So I said, well, we need to do the same thing in the North. So I said, let's do the first one, because I know this one, and that would be Newark, because I have been in Newark for over 50 years now, working in one way or another toward that elusive quality called justice. And so I said, there's a lot of history in Newark, a lot of people that we don't know about, as well as some of the people that we do know about. One of the most important parts of our website tells folks about those known and unknown people right there in our website. So we started with some people, as folks do all the time. You need some good people around you. And the first thing I did was to get a group of people, a committee, people like Bill Strickland and Phil Hutchings and Kamosi Woodard and others, Bill Howard. We started with the idea. We had the backup of Rutgers University, which is where I was. I'm going to introduce the funders to you a little later on, but the first funder was the Terrell Fund, and they have stuck with us for the 3 years, going on 4, plus there are others, as I said, I will introduce later on. But the important thing was to have somebody who was technologically savvy, who knew history and loved history. And I was recommended to this young man by Bill Strickland. Bill Strickland and I have known each other for a long time. He's an old movement guy as well. Recently retired from the University of Massachusetts, but was originally head of the Northern Student Movement, another organization I had the pleasure of working with. And he recommended this man. His name is Peter Blackmer. Peter distinguished himself as our lead researcher. There are 2 others that you will meet, but I'm going to give the microphone to Peter right now so that he can tell you a little bit more about riseupnewark.com. Peter Blackmer.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, and thank you everyone for joining. I see that there's a lot of heavy hitters in attendance tonight, and so it's really exciting to be speaking with you all and sharing a bit about this project that we've been working on and working very hard on for the last several years. So my task right now is to kind of introduce the site very briefly as some context for presenting chapter 4. We'll then turn it over to Beatrice and Yolanda to walk through the research that they've conducted for those. So I'm going to share the screen really quickly to give a bit of a tutorial on the site so that folks can get acquainted with how things are laid out and explain how this is structured. So what we're looking at right now is the home screen. You'll see some familiar faces in there, I'm sure. What we have here is the structure of the different chapters. So chapter 1, Who's Got the Power, focuses on the different ethnic and racial groups that arrived in Newark over time during the 19th and 20th centuries particularly. looking at the ways in which different groups built, gained, and maintained social, economic, and political power in the city. Before moving into chapter 2, which is the emergence of Black power, looking at post-war organizing, particularly from the late 1940s to 1960, laying out essentially the groundwork that was laid for the emergence of the civil rights and Black power movements in the city of Newark. In chapter 3, we get into really into great detail with the civil rights and Black power movements. Is broken into 3 different parts. And if we look up at the navigation menu up here, you can see all the different subpages. So with chapter 3, we have part 1 titled Black Resistance Builds, which focuses on different grassroots organizing campaigns in Newark preceding the 1967 rebellion. We have a part that's specifically dedicated to the 1967 rebellion, looking at the spark, the different actors who are involved, including police, community members, different levels of political officials, and the outcomes and impacts of the rebellion. And part 3, looking at how political organizing changed in the days, months, and years following the rebellion, setting the stage for the election of Ken Gibson as Newark's first Black mayor in 1970. So that is the bulk of the site leading up to chapter 4. Now, before I turn it over, I just want to point out 2 additional aspects of the site that I think are really important and perhaps really exciting for many folks that are listening, and some potential areas for engagement and collaboration, because this is a community-driven project. We want people to be involved in this work. And if there are ways that you think that you would like to get involved, I encourage you to please reach out to us, and I'll drop our email address in the chat momentarily. But one of the sections I think is really that I was really excited to work on with this project was a section that profiles different grassroots organizers from the long Black freedom movement in Newark. So you see a lot of familiar names and faces in here. And to give you an idea about how this looks and how this is laid out, we can, for example, since Mr. Williams brought up Phil Hutchings, we can click on Phil Hutchings' profile here and get an idea about his time in Newark, his activities as an organizer, and one of the core reasons for this kind of aspect is to really uplift some of the unsung heroes of Black freedom struggles in the urban North, and also give future generations some guideposts to look up to and to look towards for inspiration and empowerment as local civil rights heroes.
Hey, Peter.
Yes.
Peter, we've had a request for you to speak up a bit. One of the participants. Okay.
Sure. Sorry about that. I hope this is a little more clear. So just to repeat briefly, one of the important aspects of this section of the site is to really give intentional credit to, as Mr. Williams said, some of the foot soldiers in the movement in Newark, and give future and current generations of young folks some examples of civil rights heroes and heroines that they can look towards, and not always having to be looking south for inspiration and for encouragement and engaging in similar struggles today. But of course, as you notice in that profile's homepage, there's a lot of names that aren't reflected in that. And this is where we can always use more support with building that out. So if there are names of people that you would like to see up there, or if you're a teacher and you have students that would like to collaborate on this and write profiles and get some experience in doing that and also contribute to this work, please reach out and let us know. And we would love and welcome that kind of collaboration. And the last aspect of this I wanted to bring up was the contact tab. And there is a button here where you can share your story. And what that allows you to do is to essentially contribute to the histories that are being presented on this site. So you can either write your own memories, your own accounts of the movement in Newark. You can upload different photos or documents that you might have, and share any audio video sources as well. And those are welcome contributions to the site, and you can see some of your family history is represented in the way that Black history and movement history is represented and taught in Newark. So with that all laid out, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Williams to introduce Chapter 4 and Yolanda and Beatrice.
Okay, thank you for that, Peter. I forgot to tell you all that Peter got his PhD from the University of Massachusetts. We went out together to work on Rise Up Detroit, which is one of the 10 cities we hope to involve in this thing. And we were at the Wayne State University. Next thing I knew, they liked him so much out there, they offered him a job. So that's how Newark lost Peter. That's how I lost Peter, but he has still stayed with us and has been incredibly loyal and useful in this whole process. Now, one of the things, Peter, can you go back to the, I'm going to trust on you to bring these things in. I understand the power of technology, but I am not the man to do this. Let's go back to the About section. And we're going to go into let's go into Chapter 1, because I want to show you something. Chapter 1, please. Let's go over to, yes, pre-1950s. Now, the idea here, I said, well, we want to talk about Black power, but we can't talk about Black power in a vacuum without understanding what the other folks were doing. So as a way to introduce you to Newark, I asked, who's got the power? And the first thing we did was to go all the way back to the beginning of Newark. I didn't realize this was going to be such a hit, but none of the ethnic groups have been really studied as much as we studied them. So you see, these are some of the ethnic groups who were here at one point or another, including the Native Americans. And then we had the Puritans who came in and quote unquote bought Newark for the equivalent of $700. And we then proceeded to bring in, the other ethnic groups, the Germans, the Jews, the Italians, the Irish before the Italians, and some of the others that you probably haven't heard of before. But the other thing I want to show you is how this is organized. Let's click on African Americans, please. We tell you a little bit about it in the beginning. We say read more, but this is how the website is set up. We have chapters, then we have sub-chapters. There were enslaved African Americans in Newark, and they made money for a lot of people. Some of the banks that you see here in Newark now owe their first monies to the slavers who had the folks working on the outskirts of Newark. Newark was at one point as big as Essex County is now, but as groups came along, they decided to branch off, and that's when the other immigrants came. So Newark had a somewhat of a farming economy outside, but inside it was noted for its industry. So I want you to click on that Free Blacks thing right there, because there's one point I want to leave you with before we go forward. And that has to do with, that has to do with the house on 70 Warren Street. I'm going to give you this, and then we're gonna let you go into Chapter 4. But this was a house on the Underground Railroad, and I want to make sure you know about this, because this was on property that is owned by Rutgers University. If you all know anything about the soccer stadium up there, you know about this. We had a young lady who helped us, Teresa Vega. We had a young man who helped us, James Amamasur, who told me about it. And I don't want to get, I just got a note from Peter saying, don't get too involved in this, because I really get excited about this period. But this was a house that was in the home, which was in the hands of the King family, Thompson King family, up until the 1930s. So people should really get to know this website and get to know some of the things. Now, hold it right there, Peter. The website structure itself, which was designed by Mosaic Strategies, wonderful group of people. So we want to give a big shout out to Mosaic. The organization was such that we had the information, the written information on the left, and then we had the visual information, all the photos and all the video clips that we could find. Well, to begin with, we had 1,270, I believe. Tell me if I'm right, Peter. How many documents did we have, and how many video clips did we have?
Now I have over 500 plus videos, thousands of documents, including documents and photographs.
Okay, so that'll give you an idea of how this thing was organized. We did 3 chapters, as Peter named them, and then we said, well, we want to go into beyond 1970. So in 1970 is when the community got together and elected Ken Gibson. We had a great big party for that back in June. And we had 700 and some people on Zoom, but as this thing got out on Facebook, we ended up with about 18,000 people looking at what we did. And that now we have chapter 4, which is the Gibson years. But we went right up to explaining to you how the people got together and did our thing to make him the first Black mayor of Newark and of a major northeastern city. And then we said, well, let's go to the first 4 years of the Gibson administration and maybe a little longer. Now, you see that picture there, you see right up the front, you see Harry Belafonte and Ken Gibson. In the back, there's some of the council persons that were elected, Donald Tucker, Sharp James, some of the other people who ran, Earl Harris. All of these people came out of the Black and Puerto Rican Convention, which we will talk to you about. But I want to introduce some people who helped take us further into this chapter 4. I want to introduce to you Yolanda Greene. She is a law student at Rutgers University, former educator, and Beatrice Adams, who is working, she has all but her dissertation. She's working on that diligently from Rutgers University. And so these are the ladies who did the research to bring us up to the point where we are now. So hello, Yolanda, and hello, Beatrice. I'm going to start with either one of you. You can start telling us some of the sections that you worked on. Maybe we should start with Yolanda because she was here first. Yolanda, what were some of the sections that you worked on to help fill out the chapter 4?
Hello, good evening, everyone. I focused on 4 areas. So it was climate of graft and corruption in the late 1960s, Black employment and training, minority business development, and then the effects of the NCTTC and the Newark agreements. So those are my 4 areas. You want me to share a little bit about each one?
Yes, share a little bit about each one. And this is all part of what I call the conditions in which we found ourselves as the new mayor came in, particularly what the mayor found when he came into City Hall. This is these were the conditions. Now, can you all hear out there now? I saw a note from Carol Glassman that they couldn't hear too well. So people tell us in the chat, if you can't hear, we'll try to talk a little louder, but I think someone told Carol, you got to turn it up. So, okay. People are saying that it sounds okay. Everybody can hear. Carol Glassman, I don't know why you can't hear it, but okay, coming in loud and clear. Carol, all right, let's go ahead.
Okay, so I'll start with the climate of graft and corruption in the late 1960s. And I believe some of this is probably found in chapter 3, but I think it's important to start there because as Mr. Williams said, we want to highlight what Mayor Gibson inherited. And so as many of you know, there were cases of police brutality going on in the city, and it was the Congress of Racial Equality that led the charge for having a police review board back under Mayor Adonisio, and he opposed it. Also, what was going on, the city council had approved the use of police dogs in the city. And that was led by one of the councilmen, Councilman Imperiali, who led that charge. And so the city council did approve it, but they did reverse it in short order. Given the way that police dogs were used in the South, they decided that that might not be a good idea to bring that to the city. And then after the rebellion, the governor at the time, Governor Hughes, put out a commission, a report on the civil disorder in Newark. And among the things that was noted in that report was the level of corruption that was in the city government under Mayor Adonisio. And that report, of course, drew a lot of attention to the administration, and eventually the police director was indicted, as well as the mayor himself, Mayor Adonisio, was also indicted. So that was kind of the climate that Mayor Gibson, or Kenneth Gibson, assumed once he became the mayor. A couple of other points to point out: that there was a lot of political patronage going on. And what I found is that that did continue into Mayor Gibson's administration. And when he would try to resist that, he was met with resistance from city council on different policies and initiatives that he was trying to put through. So it was, a difficult time. Also, the staff that he inherited was mainly made up of civil servants. And so that also was another element of difficulty that he had to contend with once he became the mayor. The next topic was Black employment and training. And there was an economic blueprint for Newark published by the Office of Economic Development in the city of Newark. And one of the things that they noticed or noted was that there was an exodus of affluent and white people who were leaving the city. And in place was a flow of what they characterized as poor and unskilled people from the South. So to deal with that issue to some degree, the U.S. Department of Labor, under the Manpower Development and Training Act of 1962, started sending lots of money to the city of Newark to help train, residents and get them placed and get them employed in the city. And Newark's total employment and manpower program, also known as TEAM, received about $4 million to start this training of residents. And the U.S. Department of Labor actually called it "keep them cool money" as a way to make sure that no more uprisings were to take place. And so that was a benefit for the city. In 1971, so the executive director of team said that about 4,000 people had been trained and placed in jobs, and they had collectively earned about $2 million in wages. Along with the government response to the manpower programs, there were private sector or nonprofit organizations who were also helping out with the training efforts that were going on in the city. So we had BIC, which stood for Business Industrial Community Corporation, and they were a coalition of representatives from the business community, civil rights groups, a lot of different people who came together and discussed different issues that were going on with Blacks and Puerto Ricans. And then they would set up training programs as well. From BIC started another organization called SEED, and that was the Skill Escalation Employment and Development Program. And that was another training program that also trained people in machine shop skills and clerical skills. I don't know if you want me to go into a couple of points of interest, because there are a lot of things that came out or what I discovered under that bucket. So I'll just.
All right, let me ask you some questions. I appreciate that. One of the most skilled or skillful people that we had in town at that time was a man named Gus Henningberg. All of the things that you just named, Gus didn't start them necessarily, but just tell us a little bit about Gus. And you saw so much about Gus that you designed a little piece of history for us. So if you could show that chart, maybe you can explain what's going on.
Okay, and so before we show the chart, Peter, if you could show the picture of Gus Henningberg first. There's like a 3-panel picture of him.
All right.
Can you go, there's a 3-panel picture. Do you have that?
Let's just stick with that because you've got the chart there as well with
Okay.
Gus.
All right, and so it's fine. What I wanted to show from that 3-panel picture of him was it was a Jet magazine article about him, and they actually called him the brain behind some of the construction program, training program that was in the city. And I thought that was interesting, the termage of being considered the brain, because what I found in looking at the different organizations that were influential in getting some training done for the residents in the city was that his name kept coming up over and over again. And what I found was that his organization, that he was the president of the Greater Newark Urban Coalition, was really at the center of a lot of the private organizations that were used as funnels to get money, receive money from the federal government, and then they would parse it out to the community. So if you look, oh, there's the picture right there. They said he was the brain behind the job construction project. And I thought that was just very, very telling, not just to that project, but to the other organizations that I mentioned from that map. So Peter, if you could go back to the map. Thank you. So you'll see BIC up there, the Business and Industrial Community Corporation. And so what this map shows you is some of the key players. That's what I call it, the key players map. It shows you some of those people who were or organizations that were very instrumental to the job training program in the city of Newark. And then it also shows you some of the key position holders of the organization. So for example, in BIC, you see that Kenneth Gibson was actually a co-chairman at one point. This is of course before he became mayor. And then you also see SEED, which came from BIC, the Skill Escalation and Employment Development Program. You start to see that their names being repeated over and over. So you'll see C. Theodore Pickney is in a couple of spots. I didn't talk about the Interracial Council for Business Opportunity, the ICBO, but you see Kenneth Gibson again, who was a member. But all of these organizations, MEDIC, the Newark Construction Trades and Training Corporation, they all kind of came from the leadership of Gus Gustav Hindenburg. And not that, as Mr. Williams said, that he was the only one that was involved or the only one that created these things, but he was like the common denominator in a lot of these organizations that were prominent at the time. And these organizations were responsible for holding millions of dollars coming from the federal government to, like I said, train people and place people in various jobs.
So let me say this as well. All of these organizations came from struggle. These organizations were not just put there by some benevolent hand, but all of them came from the struggle of the people in Newark. I know because I was tangentially involved with some of the one in particular, the Newark Construction Trades Training Program. That's the Burgundy one, the NCTTC, and there should be some additional names in there, Yolanda. George Fontaine should be in one of those little squares there because he was the person who really ran this thing. I see another woman here who we interviewed. We went down to South Carolina to interview this person, Ruth McLean, who worked for Gus, Bill Mercer, who eventually went to Washington, D.C., Ted Pinkney, who was a longtime resident of the North Ward here in Newark, just died recently. He was one of the, eventually he became a candidate for city council. So the list goes on and on and on. You see Wilbur Parker, who was a treasurer. Wilbur Parker was involved with something called the Parker-Callahan fight, where Mayor Anesia wanted to put a man who was a high school graduate as the business administrator for the Board of Education, and the Black community said no when we got the first Black CPA in town. So that was a fight. All of these organizations were part of the little government within the government that was afforded us, but we had to struggle to get the money to go into these kinds of situations, into these organizations. So this was part of the economics. This was part of our economics, if you will. Very small, relatively small, but some more successful than others. So is there anything else you want to add on that? Because I want to go over to Beatrice for a minute. We can come back to some more of what you were doing, or what you did.
Yes, I do want to just point out one thing. There was a lot of duplication of programs. So in that economic blueprint that I mentioned in the late 60s, some of that report was a report to highlight some of the things that were going on in Newark in terms of economics, and also to make some recommendations. And a couple of things that came out of that report was that even at that time in the late 60s, there was a lot of duplication of programs, and there were programs that were focused on job training, but for low level, low entry and manufacturing labor type of jobs. And one of the recommendations was that going forward, the city should start to train people in other jobs besides, construction jobs, besides machinery, because the world globally was changing. And so those manufacturing jobs were declining. I say that to set the stage that once in the I guess heat of the time when these organizations were very, very pivotal, a lot of the training programs still focused on manufacturing, machinery jobs, and there was a lot of duplication of programs. And duplication meaning not only amongst these organizations, but even in terms of the city government. So where there was a construction, NCTTC, that was a private organization, but then the city also had an organization that also trained people for construction jobs and things like that. Whereas there were organizations that dealt with business and helping people start businesses and find jobs on the private sector, the city also had manpower programs as well. So there was a lot of duplication of programs, and a lot of money came into the city. But unfortunately, the city was still named as a persistent unemployment area in 1971. And according to the Department of Labor, the unemployment rate didn't move that much, even as a result of all these programs and funds.
one other thing on NCTTC, the Newark Construction Trades Training Corporation, that came out of the medical school fight, where we said, if you want to have this medical school, you got to have Black people and brown people that were Puerto Ricans, and we didn't have very many other Latinos at that point. And so they said, we wanted one half the apprentices and, I'm sorry, one half the journeyman and no, one half the apprentices and 1/3 of the journeyman.
Correct.
So they said, well, we can't find any. We said, well, you got to give us the money to train folks. And that's what NCTTC was all about, training young men. It wasn't, there weren't women. We weren't thinking about women at the time. That was a mistake for the construction industry. But over 600 were trained, placed in this particular job of building the medical school here. And those same people got union books. That's the other thing we insisted on. So they were used throughout Essex County for a long time. A lot of those people are only just now recently retired. And that's because of the work of the NCTTC, which, as I said, was run by George Fontaine, with Gus Henningberg being kind of like out the front blocking to make sure that everything worked. So let's go over to, thank you, Yolanda. Let's go over now to that was some of what she did, the pre-Gibson aspect. And then Beatrice Adams took on some other assignments. Why don't you talk about which ones that you want. Tell us what you did, that the list of objectives that you had, and then tell us what you want us to know about anyone that you think is important.
Well, I want to first start by saying thank you for the Newark Public Library for making this event possible, to my fellow researchers, and also to Mr. Williams. Not only did he bring me into this project, but his role that he played historically in the city is part of what drew me to this project in the first place. I was actually doing research about Rutgers Newark and wanted to do an oral interview with him, do oral history. And he said, hey, I have this project, would you like to be involved? And little do you know that I'd already been using some of the primary sources from the website as part of my research. So now to be on the other side of it, not a researcher going to the website and using the primary sources, but those people helping to make those primary sources available to the public is a great opportunity. So one of the write-ups that I did for the project is the transformation of the modern Black freedom movement during the first term of Gibson. And I really think in a way, a lot of the articles and write-ups I did for the project are about more nuanced aspects of how are people understanding and fighting for a larger realization of freedom in the city of Newark during that first term period, so in the early 1970s. So ultimately, like Yolanda is kind of talking about, a lot of what is happening in this moment is in the wake of the 1967 rebellion, right? So as we think about what is happening to get Gibson elected, it's this energy of this united front that galvanizes organizations, community leaders that may not have the same vision of how to get freedom, but ultimately see electoral politics as a powerful mode to get a larger share of it, galvanizing around Gibson through, and importantly, for one of my other articles is about cultural nationalism through the kind of leadership and help of Amir Baraka. So thinking more about that, as many of you know, are familiar with, shortly after Gibson's elected, Amir Baraka, this kind of united front that he has brought together to get elected, get Gibson into office. Gibson and Amir Baraka, before the ink is dry, right, are no longer getting along in the same way. And as the article explores, Baraka is able to galvanize this set of community leaders and organizations that have a different set of politics from himself and from Gibson, right? And it's this different idea about cultural nationalism, about aggressive politics, about conservatism that ultimately cause a bridge between the two. I also write articles about public housing. Housing is and continues to be an important part of how people think about and understand freedom in the city of Newark. I wrote about the Stellar Rights housing strike in particular, which is important not only for the history of Newark, but for the history of urban housing and development across the nation. It's the longest rent strike in the history of HUD, and it plays kind of a key role in shifting the public discourse around what should public housing look like. Should it be these tall, high-rise buildings that concentrate people into one particular place, or should it look different? Who should be in charge of it? Should the tenants have control and management of the buildings? Are they capable of those things? The answer is yes. They do it from the mid 1970s to the early 1990s. And even though it's usually called the Stellar Rights, rent strike actually involves people living in public housing buildings from across the city of Newark. Stellar Rights just maintains the highest amount of people participating in the strike, and some of the key leaders come out of Stellar Right. The last kind of article that I see as part of this group that's exploring the nuances of what happens to the modern Black freedom movement with the election of Gibson is about the teacher strikes of 1970 and 1971. When I was assigned this article, I thought to myself, oh, I do education. I do African-American educational history. Like, I have all the teeth to handle this. Little did I know what I was getting myself in store for. But ultimately, what was frustrating or confusing or nerve-wracking about the project on the front end is actually what I began to love about it, because it's such an intersectional history. We've been talking undoubtedly a lot in the lead up to election about how the Black community is not a monolith, how you have to think about race, class, gender, age together to kind of understand how somebody's social location affects how they see freedom, justice, liberty, equality, democratic politics. And you see all of that coming to fore in this fight between not only the union, which sees itself as a leftist organization fighting the power, right, headed by a Black woman, but the Organization for Negro Education, which has a strong critique based on race and class of what's happening with the teachers union, in addition to the city government, which has another stance, and the teachers aren't even on the same side. So what I really found a little bit scary about the article in the first place became what I loved about it, the kind of complex history that it became and the kind of intersectional history that it explores. So shifting.
Let me stop you right there and let's dive a little deeper into that. You left out one part of that, and that's the students who became politicized. And I just want to point out where people can find some of this. If you go to chapter 4 now and look into this thing that says the, what's it called? Education and the Newark teachers strikes, you will find some of the people that you now see, or maybe don't see as much as you would ordinarily. And one of those is Larry Ham. Larry Ham got his start with the Newark teacher strike because he was a student and he said, hey, we want to graduate. So he organized the students and they took a stand on this. So you see all of these things going up and forward. Go back a little bit, Peter, so I can show you somebody else who's go back up. There's another man in here, and that is now I don't see him, but the Organization of Negro Educators. You've seen him on a lot of our programs that we do here, and that's Fred Means, who was a teacher who was who had a different perspective, as she said, a perspective of race that come down now, that Carol Graves, right there, who did not share his ideology, both of whom were teachers. So as she said, this is a very complex matter. If you want to see the complexity of quote unquote the North, look at the Newark teacher strikes, because it was 2. And I think we spelled it out here. In addition to that, there's somebody else you might know, Vicki Donaldson, who talks about her time on the Board of Education. All of these, all 3 of these people were appointees by Mayor Gibson. And then you have to understand the role he played or didn't play to figure out some of the things that created a teacher strike that went on, which was the longest teacher strike in the city of Newark. So this is a classical example of the kinds of things that you will find in this website. And then you have other people who talk about some aspect. We have Steve Block on education and patronage in the education scene. Steve Block, who was a good friend of mine from the Newark Community Union Project. Carol Glassman is on, I understand she's on still. We came from a group called NCUP. Steve was organizing parents at one point. We have Fred Means, Larry Ham, Vicki Donaldson, and then there's Becky Doggett on Emir Baraka and the Newark Preschool Council. So all of this is involved. Now go up one more, because I want to talk about this other young man, the organizer of the Chad School. Where is he? Pat Green, and the founding of the Chad School, which was a Black independent school in Newark, not a charter school, but all of this is in that one chapter on education and the Newark teacher strike. If you don't read anything else, just read that one. And you're going to see why the North was a lot more complicated than it was in the South. And it's why I came to Newark in the first place, to get involved in issues of race, class, as I came to find out later on, gender and other things as well. So I'm turning it back to you, Beatrice. Let's talk about the Puerto Rican political movement. I'm moving you along because I want to have some time for questions.
That's fine. That's where I was headed. So we're on the same page. So the last article I did for the website is about Puerto Rican political organizing, and a kind of key part of that is this cultural event that was happening in Branch Brook Park in 1974. Just like so many Black and Brown communities, the Puerto Rican community was being overspelled. There's an incident about a dice game that might have been a domino game. It leads to a confrontation between the police and some of the people at the cultural celebration, and ends up a little girl is trampled. And this starts, is the spark of its own rebellion. This rebellion that leads to a rise in the kind of community organizing and political conscience that's happening both within the Puerto Rican community and the larger Latinx community in Newark at the time. Gibson comes to the park. He tries to quiet the kind of rising tensions. Imperiale also comes to the park and does the opposite, right?
Tell them who Imperiale is.
Yolanda talked a little bit already about Imperiale, but he is a city councilman from the North Side, and he has a much more conservative perspective when it comes to race relations in the city.
I don't know why you're being so nice, but go ahead.
If I was to use my today terms, I would use very different terms, okay? Everyone in the chat is talking about the importance of teaching this to students, and I've done a bit of that, teaching it in my classes. I teach college classes for the most part. I work with high schoolers in the summer, and that is not the word I use when I describe him to them. So, Gibson quiets them. He has a meeting with him the next day. And he is both honest in his candor. I can only do so much for you as mayor. But it's also a moment where undoubtedly the community just wanted to feel supported, especially from this elected official that the community had galvanized around to help get elected. And it leads to this kind of, I don't want to say turning inward, but the sense that we need to build our resources and strength as a community. And ultimately it goes back full circle about the limitations and the possibilities of Black electoral politics as a way to achieve freedom and justice.
Much of the issue involving the Puerto Rican freedom movement and the organizing effort did stem from two very important factors. We had a Black and Puerto Rican convention that picked the candidates, of which Gibson was one, as well as some of the other people who ran for council, as I named. But there wasn't that much attention paid to the aspirations of the Puerto Rican people made in the Gibson administration at that time. And so once this, some people call it a rebellion. Some of the Puerto Ricans that I interviewed said, well, it wasn't a rebellion, it was a riot. They call it a riot. So I'm gonna call it a riot. So after that, a couple of things began to happen, and this is where I want you to pay attention to, if you could put that up, Peter, that particular section, some interviews that I did. I interviewed about 18 people over the course of 6 to 9 months. As I told you once, I even went down to South Carolina to get some people because there was some Newark immigrants down there. So here we give some of the backgrounds. A very important person that you need to know about is Hilda Hidalgo, and the role that she played in the Black and Puerto Rican community, the convention, I'm sorry, and bringing the people together, the Blacks and the Puerto Ricans at that time. So we captured, Hilda's dead, unfortunately, but we were able to get some video clips about her. We were able to get some of these documents that you see coming on down. Now come down to one of the things I want you to see is the Mike Rodriguez, and hold on right there. Mike Rodriguez and Griselle Ubery on the 1974 Puerto Rican Rebellion in Newark. That is a great interview where they put it out on the table what some of the issues were and what happened. And then you get Mayor Gibson's statement on what happened. And later on, come on down, there's another interview that I wanted to talk about. Well, I don't know if that one made the cut as of yet, but we are going to put that in. We had another interview which talks about the relationship of the Puerto Ricans and Steve Adubato as a result of Gibson not paying much attention. So Steve Adubato, as the Italians were leaving Newark, Steve Adubato, who was up until just recently, he died a couple of weeks ago, he took over the cause of the Puerto Ricans, helped them get involved with Essex County politics, with Newark politics, and thus reestablished himself as a power broker of the people who lived in the North Ward, so much so that all the mayors who have come through Newark have had to deal with Steve Adubato because of the way he brokered the power of the Italians and then of the Puerto Ricans. And he managed to make not only just a name for himself, but he learned how to control small turnout elections, so much so that anybody who wanted to get elected in this county had to come through him, and eventually had a big say to what's going on in the state. So all of that stems from this whole relationship starting with Ken Gibson. The reason I talked about that, Yolanda, I'm sorry, Beatrice, and I'm gonna throw it back to you. This is not just about Ken Gibson, as you see, but this is a chapter that is about the times of Ken Gibson. We have to look at it not just about Ken as mayor, but what else was going on with the men and with the women who were a part at this particular time. You want to talk some more about that, Beatrice?
That was the conclusion of my formulated comments. So what would you like me to talk about?
You can say whatever you want to say about that.
I'm just teasing, guys. I'm really happy. As you can see, I have on my pink and green because our vice president is the AKA. Shout out to Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
And so am I. Shout out. Don't let me skiwi up in here.
All right, all right. Using your advanced position to say whatever you feel like saying.
Sorry, I'm gonna be quiet now.
Okay, I think that kind of give you, we want to kind of whet your appetite, but there was a section that kind of points towards what I was trying to say there at the end. This is more than about just Ken Gibson, but it is about Ken Gibson as well. So Peter, can you show a little bit about our evaluation section, just to let people see where we're going with that?
Yes, and can I invoke privilege real briefly before
Yes.
we move into the evaluation? There were 2 pages that I wanted to just point towards because folks had expressed interest in the chat. The first is in regards to Kawaida Towers, which we had kind of skirted around briefly. But I want to just show that section real briefly because I know Professor Burrows in the chat mentioned that his students are working on projects on Kawaida Towers this semester, which is exciting to hear. And I want to just quickly demonstrate where you can find more resources on that. So I'm going to share real quick. I'm not going to talk in any length about this, but in the page from chapter 4 on Amiri Baraka and cultural nationalism, if you come down past this overview of his organizing work, particularly with CFUN and with CAP, you're going to see some really important clips from the oral history interviews that Mr. Williams did, where we see folks like Amina Baraka and Estelle David and Kamosi Woodard, who I think I saw on the participant tab. So shout out. Some really, really valuable reflections that are being offered looking back on this era and drawing lessons for continuing the struggle. The archive sections of this page are incredibly dense, and I encourage teachers, professors, community members, anyone who's looking for information on Amiri Baraka, CFUN, Congress of African People, to take some time and explore through these sliders. You're gonna see a lot of really valuable resources. But to get back to the topic at hand, which is Kawaida Towers, you keep coming down, there's a full section on that struggle, which draws heavily from Professor Woodard's invaluable book, A Nation Within a Nation. If you haven't read it already, go pick it up. Shameless plug. You're going to see a lot of really important oral history clips, and more being added as well. It just takes a lot of time to process these clips and get them uploaded online and then onto the website. So you see a lot of a diverse array of resources here. But one part that's kind of hidden down at the bottom of this page, I want to make sure that folks are aware of, is a collection of Baraka's newspapers, Black Newark and Unity and Struggle, which was as close to a full run as we can find from 1968 to 1978. So you have almost a decade's worth of these newspapers digitized that I spent hours in NYU's Tamiment Library just crunched over with my smartphone and scanning the documents. So shout out to the Tamiment Library at NYU that has an invaluable collection of newspapers there as well. And then one last page I wanted to point towards was one on the struggles for police reform. And while I'm in the mode of giving shout outs, my friend Andy Grimm I saw was a participant in the Zoom tonight, who is writing his dissertation on struggles for police reform in Newark. So keep an eye out for that, and I'm hoping that Andy will by putting him on blast right now. I hope we can compel him to write a little bit for the site as well. But this kind of lays out some important trends during Gibson's first term about the continuity of issues of police violence and police brutality in Newark, despite having a Black mayor in City Hall, and how entrenched many of those issues of systemic racism and police violence were in the city. So I'm through invoking my executive privilege right now with moderator powers, and I'll kick it back to you, Mr. Williams, and pull up the page that you were requested.
Okay. Yeah, it's impossible for us to tell you all the things that are in here, and I'm glad Peter was looking here to see who's amongst us. I didn't do that, but I'm sure some of the people who I interviewed are probably a part of the participants. These oral histories will be a part of the collection for Rise Up Newark, but also a part of the Newark Public Library's collection. So if you want, you can come back. You will be able eventually to hear the whole interviews of everyone that I did. 18 hours times 2 is probably a good estimate of what we have there. Of course, we couldn't put everything up here, nor was it necessary to put up everything up here, but I see some of the things are missing that I want you to see. But one of the things we said we wanted to do, we wanted to talk about what was happening in City Hall. We wanted to talk about what was happening outside of City Hall. And so we have here an evaluation perspective. This is something that you can participate in if you want. The name is optional. I want to repeat that. It's going to be fixed so that everyone can see that. But we do want your email so we can stay in touch with you. After going through all that we've done here, we want you to rate. What grade would you give the Gibson administration for advancing Black equality and empowerment in Newark? And you can do A, B, C, D, F. You explain your answer. So here's a little bit, just a teaser. What we did was to just take some of the people who who interviewed, who expressed an opinion, and we tried to mix some of the opinions so that you could see what folks felt about those folks who were actually involved, who were there in one way or another. We want you to get an idea of what's going on. So let's have that opening remarks, Peter. Yes, no?
Give me just a second. I gotta get the settings.
All right.
Correct.
And we will be answering some of your questions. So I think maybe Peter was paying attention to some of the salient ones, but if not, please go back there. And Kalina, if you're out there, look at some of the interesting questions and maybe you can tell me what do you think we should be doing, as well as some of the researchers, if you all can do that. If you all can get to me the questions that you think should be answered, Yolanda and Beatrice.
Yes, Mr. Williams, I did see a question or question/comment in the chat that I wanted to address.
Okay, we'll do that as soon as Peter pulls it. We're going to give him a couple more minutes here.
I think it's up. Can you see it?
Gibson was the first Black mayor of a major U.S. city. Here are some assessments of the mayor from those who were there.
Dan O'Flaherty, who worked for the city of Newark, makes an interesting point when he says you can't look at the accomplishments of an elected official at the time. You have to reflect on it many, many years later. His metaphor is, it's like grass growing. You can't watch it grow. You can see it after it's grown, but you can't watch it. So he urged us to look at the Gibson years from many years after, and still encourages us to continue to look at those years and at that legacy even in years to come, because he thinks some of the outcomes and some of the results won't manifest themselves until many, many years after the fact. And I think that was also an important point for one of our contributors to make.
Ken Gibson was a smart man, but he was not the man for the time.
Please explain.
Please explain that. I think he had, I think it was hard-headed. You know, and I got along with the mayor, but when things started getting really out of hand, I don't know that, and I wasn't behind the scenes, but I don't think that Ken stepped up to the plate and took charge of those people who were on the board. But then I don't know who put all those people on the board, the politics behind it. But, you know, it's hard for me to take a guess at anything now that long ago. But I don't think that.
I think what we wanted to do is to just give you a little idea of what you can look at that really if you just want to make the assessment. But I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't study all of the research that has been done by the people who did the research and just go to that video clip. It is interesting, but you've got 11 sections, subsections of this chapter that you ought to study before you take that final test. And of course, that's just one opinion that Carol had, and there were other people who, of course, thought that Ken did a very good job. So you said there was a question you wanted to answer, Yolanda?
Yes, there was earlier up in the chat, Mr. Damon Rich put a question in the chat, and his question, hopefully I get it right, was in showing that key players map that we showed earlier on. His question was, how would we categorize the organizations that are prolific in Newark right now? The power of them, you know, how will we characterize them? And so first I want to say that it was truly an honor to be a part of this project because, as Beatrice mentioned, it's such a complex history, but it's so rich and it was so interesting. And one of the big things that I came away with as I was researching is how much or how true the statement is, history repeats itself. Well, if we go a little bit further, if you don't know your history, you're deemed to repeat it. And while I was researching, it was just mind-blowing how many things we're dealing with right now that they were dealing with back then. It's just mind-blowing, whether it's the duplication of programs that I mentioned, whether it was political patronage, whatever it is, the Newark unions, education, whatever it is. It was just amazing how much similarity there is to now to then. So that really blew my mind. But I wanted to address Don's question because he pushes us a little bit further beyond chapter 4 and really beyond, you know, this whole website, this whole project. And I am not, by no stretch of the imagination, an expert on current organizations in Newark. But I will say, and I really want to make the point and emphasize the point, that it behooves us to really dive into this information that's presented to us free of charge to take part of, because we really need to understand our history, the history of just Newark, and see the issues that they dealt with before, how we're still dealing with them. What do we need to do to change that cycle of repeating the same things over and over? And not only the problems, but also sustainability. There were a lot of good things that came out at that time. How do we sustain those things? And sometimes, to Don's point, I can't really answer it on point because I'm not an expert in it. I have an opinion, but I don't want to, you know, give an opinion. But I think it's important for leaders, organizational leaders, political leaders to really take inventory of what has already happened, what has already been done, so that we don't keep making the same mistakes. We don't keep falling short over and over again from generation to generation. And I also want to echo how important it is for this to be in the Newark Public Schools. I think all of us panelists, and so I echo Kalina Berryman, the Executive Director of Abbott Leadership Institute, and so many others who put in the chat, that this is so important for our students to know about this history, so that when they come of age and they are joining the power of the streets with the power of the suites, that's Mr. Williams' phrase, that they have some context. They understand what has already transpired and don't keep us on this wheel where we're just, I hate to say a rat wheel, but we just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and we're not learning the lesson. So I thank you, Don, for that question. I know that's not the answer you wanted, but I think there probably is still a lot of duplication. And I don't really know how to address that. So I don't know if anyone else wants to address that, but, you know, is there a way that we can start coming together, consolidating some of these things that are going on, instead of always having these little isolated pockets of activity?
Okay, Beatrice, do you see a question you want to answer?
Is it wrong if I say no, but there's a question I think Yolanda can answer? There's a question.
You are going to do what you want to do, so go ahead.
There's a question from the Q&A that says, when Newark residents were being trained for different types of jobs, were they being hired in the city or outside of the city?
Well, I can't answer that one directly, but I will say this. Someone else mentioned something about the placement. Once someone mentioned that the challenge they thought was after they were trained, there was a problem with placing the people. That again goes to not only duplication of services, but the type of training that they were receiving. So we have to remember that a lot of the training programs were focused on machinery, clerical jobs, things of that nature, not necessarily training for the jobs that were coming to fruition, the medical school jobs. And I'm not talking about construction, but the other type of jobs that medical school was going to need. The airport was being expanded. So there were a lot of things going on that it seems from the research that the residents weren't being prepared for. So did they get jobs? Yes. But was it sustainable? No. And there's a lot of critique out there about how we kind of focus, we didn't take inventory of where the vacancies were and then make the training target that. So, you know, I'm sure people were placed out of the city. They were placed in the city as well, but there were limited opportunities because those type of jobs were declining. And again, in that report, and I'm not giving a lot of praise to Mayor Adoniesio's administration, but I have to be honest, one of the recommendations was for going forward, the city look at what are the vacancies, start preparing people for what's to come, not keep training them on the same things that really had very little benefit.
The exception to that was the construction trades training for the medical school. The NCTTC jobs, the training was while they were actually employed. That was part of the medical school agreement. The state had to pay for the trainees as they were being trained. They also had jobs, and then they were ushered into, in theory, although the unions resisted, into the unions as well. And there was some training at the medical school also for the people who got the jobs once the school was built, but not nearly as much, and certainly not at the higher echelon of jobs. I see a question here about the using this in schools. Let me explain to you what is going on now. We did a curriculum. It's called the Newark curriculum, and not only does it talk about the Black side, but it talks about some or all of those white ethnic groups that you saw there in their road to empowerment in the city of Newark. All of that's in the Newark, it's in the Newark curriculum. Of course, the emphasis is on what happened with Black folks and what Black folks did to get power. It's being used not as an entire course, unfortunately, but as a resource document or a resource curriculum in 6 high schools. It is my hope that one day, we will get it. We will be engaged with this with the school board to make sure that we can make this curriculum suitable for lower grades as well, and number two, to make sure that it is an entire course taught throughout a semester, because this is a story. One of the things that I call myself doing with my interjection was to show you the storyline as a person who, I'm a historian, but I was part of the history. So and the way we wrote that thing is so that you have the story, and that's the way it should be taught. So the next objective is to perhaps, if they want us to turn chapter 4 into a curriculum as well, but that's going to have to be on motion from the school district itself. Are there any other questions? Yes, Colleen, you're right. A great tool for remote learning, because it is a story and it can be told as such if you just think of it that way. Who else? Anybody else have a question that you saw? Peter, did you see any questions you want to answer?
I see two really interesting, I think, important questions. One is in the Q&A box about what role the UCC played in the politicization of African Americans in Newark. I think that's a critical question, particularly for getting at the birth of the political career of many longtime Black politicians in the city of Newark, like former Mayor Sharp James, who got his start in organizing work with the UCC. And I think that was, also a really important strategic move by community organizers during the 1960s to essentially take over area boards and use those as modes of organizing, which is also, Cyril Tyson deserves credit for some of that strategy as well, for designing the anti-poverty program in Newark in that way. And interestingly, those area board models mapped almost identically onto the wards in Newark. So it was seen as a direct threat to City Hall and Mayor Adonisio at that time. But the point being that was a really important training ground for many organizers, and that's covered at length in chapter 3. It's also touched upon in chapter 4 as well. But I wanted to kind of kick a question to the group to discuss. And I think this is a critical question for connecting and drawing lessons from the period that we are discussing tonight, and drawing lessons from that for ongoing struggles for Black equality and empowerment in the city of Newark right now. And that's coming from Christian Gardner in the chat box, who says, we often talk about Black studies being non-linear in class. So what are some similar challenges that Kenneth Gibson faced that Mayor Baraka faces today?
I mean, the first problem that comes to mind to me, it was on and continues to be on the tops of many people's head, is police violence, right? We spent a summer watching protests happen across the nation. The 1974 Puerto Rican Rebellion starts because of an incident of police violence and over surveillance of a Black and Brown community. So to me, like, the very palpable similarity is the kind of ongoing violence that is done to Black and Brown communities by the police.
The amount of money that comes into Newark that goes downtown as opposed to the money that goes into the neighborhood for development, that is a constant struggle. And I think some people have done more to even that out. I think Raz Baraka has done a lot to even that out. One of the things his father was trying to do was to build houses in the North Ward, and that's what happened with Kawaida Towers. The money was arranged, but the politics fell out as some of the racist aspects of city of the Newark came forth. Beatrice was was very nice, but Anthony Imperiale had a group which was akin to the Proud Boys of today. This was what he was up against. They lived there, Baraka's folks did not. That's something that you have to understand. And behind the scenes was Steve Adubato, who was the one who didn't want it to happen. You got to read that chapter. You read listen to Kamosi Woodard's interview, a very moving interview about the impact that this had on Baraka the Senior personally, as well as the whole movement that was around him at that particular time. Yolanda, should we end it there? I saw one that was interesting, but if you have something that you want to talk about, Black Youth Organization is mentioned in here. You got to read, you got to listen to Mr. Greene's interview. Listen to and look at Mr. Greene's interview to talk about the Black Youth Organization, which established the Chad School. I'm not going to go in there. I'm just going to direct you to that. All of that's a part of that education chapter that I told you about. What else is in here? Stella Wright Housing Project. Yes, longest rent strike in the history of the United States. It also talks about what happened to the whole question of public school, of public housing in the city of Newark, where you have so much public housing that was taken down because, yes, it was tall and it was too many people in there, but they didn't replace it with enough housing. And now you see some of those people or their offspring down around the train station with no place to live. Let's see, what else?
There is another question, Mr. Williams, maybe you address from Janice Morrell.
Mm-hmm.
She says, as I recall, we had programs to address that which Yolanda Greene mentioned. It appears in later years that the programs were started again anew. What are the status of the programs? Do they exist now? Were they absorbed by subsequent new programs? Do we, the community, keep replicating programs?
Well, one of the programs that still exists is the UCC, United Community Corporation, which came out of the War on Poverty, was started back in 1964, but it's not like it was then. In 1965, when I came to Newark, that was a battleground for the forces who were part of groups like NCUP and Willie Wright's organization. I don't even remember some of these other street organizations that were out there at that particular time. But that's where we learned another kind of politics, as Peter was alluding to. We used to be good at doing demonstrations and takeovers and things like that, but you had to learn how to function in these smoke-filled rooms at that time. So that was one that still persists, but now it's a service organization as opposed to an organization that was on paper for advocacy. That was one of the things that we spell out in the chapter on the transformation of the Black freedom movement. You got to look at that chapter, because you see one of the things that happened was we went from advocacy into service organization, and that had its own set of consequences in terms of empowerment of people, because we were all about empowering people, not just service. Of course, folks got help along the way, but that wasn't our major intention. I'm told we have to leave it, so I just want to give some credit where credit is due. Thank you, first of all, to Jocelyn Dixon, our new friend here in Newark. We're all going to come to the programs that she has other than this one. Tom Eichner, who's really been a stand-up guy and support for all of the things that we have tried to do in this particular investment of time through the 3 years that we've been in existence. I want to thank Beatrice Adams, Yolanda Greene, Peter Blackmer, Then there's some of the other folks from the original formation of Rise Up Newark. We've got James of Minnesota, Katie Singer. I know Katie's out there. I saw her name come up. We have Francesca Larson and her associate, Kevin Perez, the Mosaic Strategies Group. If you like the way this website looks, it's because of her artistry as well as industry on this particular thing. I want to thank the members of our board, the Center for Education and Juvenile Justice. Gina Nesbitt is our chairperson. The Kurt Fields Terrell Fund, the National Park Service in Washington, Public Service Electric and Gas. All of these people had were the people that we relied upon to fund us. And a little bit further back, Nancy Canner from the chancellor at Rutgers University, which made it very possible for us to go to Detroit and to start working out there. We have one chapter done, another one's going to be done at the end of this month. Is there anything else that I have missed? Anybody that I've missed? Now, there is something I would like you to do. I have a podcast called Everything's Political, and I'm hoping somebody will put that link up on the line there. So
Kalina put it in the chat box.
Oh, it's in the chat box.
Yeah.
Thank you,
And then
Colleen.
she just did it again too.
Did it again. So if you want to see the first chapter, come on out and look at that. I'm through. Thank you all for coming. We had at one point 120 some folks on the line, and that's
Yeah, you did. That was awesome. You guys did a great job. I'm so glad I got to see this.
Thank you, because
Thank you.
it's not everybody that can. It's not everybody that's interested in history. So I applaud the people from all around the country, Maryland, all over the country, trying to come in to see what we're doing here in Newark. We are indeed glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Junius. Yes, we had 125 at the most, I think, on here, and then there were more watching on Facebook. So I'll see if I can get a number from Facebook for you tomorrow, and I'll give that a number too. Okay. Well, thank you. This was a terrific program. You can tell from all the comments in the chat room. And Junius, I think you even sold one of your books. Somebody said they're going to run out and buy one of your books later this week on First Agenda.
Well,
All right.
Funny you should mention that. It's called. Never mind.
And thank you to all of you who participated tonight. If you enjoyed this program, please check out our calendar for others at npl.org/calendar. And please consider supporting the Newark Public Library at our virtual fundraiser on December 3rd. Inside and Curbside is the online version of our annual fundraising gala. For more, visit the library's website at npl.org. Good night, everyone. Be safe.